high school literacy leaders. Welcome back to Curriculum Chats. This is DLC Foster Yankee, and in this video, I'll be discussing lessons 2 and 3 in the second section of the In the Time of the Butterflies unit. Beginning with lesson 2. In this lesson, students will establish the purpose for reading Chapter 5, evaluate how the historical context of setting influences the plot, characterization, and theme in Chapter 5, as well as the use of text structure to achieve Alvarez's purpose in Chapter 5. There are two texts for this lesson, In the Time of the Butterflies and the documentary El Jefe, Portrait of a Dictator. Couple of materials. We have the In the Time of the Butterflies historical lens note-taking tool, the section 1 question set, and the section 2 question set. For the lesson overview, we will read chapter 5, the first chapter of part 2 from In the Time of the Butterflies. We will be introduced to the historical literary criticism lens and discuss how reading a text through that lens can impact how the reader understands a text. So we'll take a closer look at the 4 activities that make up lesson 2. This lesson begins with a teacher explaining the concept of literary lenses/criticism, then having students discuss with a partner the question on the screen. How might reading a text through a different lens impact, alter, or otherwise change how a reader understands a text? Before letting them know that in this unit, they're going to examine the text through several different literary lenses, the first of which will be the historical lens. In order for students to fully grasp the historical lens, they must activate their prior knowledge of the country, time period, and people associated with the novel, which is essentially what they did in the first section of this unit. If students need additional information about the Dominican Republic during the time of the Trujillo reign, the teacher might consider having them read additional nonfiction texts, such as Caribbean Connections, the Dominican Republic, from the Independent Reading List, or The Dictator Next Door by Eric Paul. Cannot pronounce that last name, but it starts with an R. For the next activity, students work either with a partner or in small groups, discussing what they already know based on their answers to the questions on the Section 1 question set. In addition, they use the questions on the screen to discuss what they already know about the Dominican Republic during the Trujillo regime. If they have access to the internet, they can look online for additional information about the Dominican Republic. Next, students listen as the teacher explains the historical lens and they take notes on their historical lens note-taking tool. The historical lens asks students to use their knowledge of history to interpret a text and analyze how the historical context influenced the writer's process. It is important to start the class's study of critical lenses for this novel with historical analysis because it asks students to return to the time period research that students completed in section 1 of this unit. Essentially, they already have the prior knowledge needed to apply this lens. To support students, as the teacher distributes the historical lens note-taking tool, they might share the notes with students orally or by displaying them in front of the classroom. The space for writing the notes is pretty small, so they might want to allow students to take notes on the back of the document. Students will use this tool as a home base for guiding their work with the historical lens, returning to it several times during the next 2 lessons. Lesson 2 concludes with students reading Chapter 5 and annotating the text for the historical time in which the novel is set and for how Dee Dee matures. Next, they discuss the questions on the screen from the Section 2 question set with a partner. What is the impact of Dee Dee's split perspective between 1948 and 1994? How do you understand the character, setting, and conflict better by having a perspective from 1948 and 1994? To support students with comprehending the complex text, there are additional questions in the teaching notes for specific struggles, as well as additional challenges for students who demonstrate advanced competency. Our cub comes from activity 4, and we have students will know the historical time in which the novel is set, understand how the historical context of setting influences the plot, characterization, and theme in chapter 5, and be able to evaluate the use of text structure to achieve Alvarez's purpose in chapter 5 by discussing what is the impact of Dee Dee's split perspective between 1948 and 1994, and how do you understand the character, setting, or conflict better by having a perspective from 1948 and 1994. Moving on to lesson 3. For the goals, teaks, and ELPs, students will analyze relationships among thematic development, characterization, point of view, significance of setting, and plot in Chapter 5. Evaluate how the historical context of setting influences the plot, characterization, and theme in Chapter 5, as well as the use of literary devices to achieve specific purposes in Chapter 5. One text, the novel. Couple of materials. We have, again, the historical lens note-taking tool, the vocabulary journal, academic discussion reference guide, style reference guide, and the section 2 question set. For the lesson overview, we will analyze Chapter 5, Didi, 1994 and 1948, from In the Time of the Butterflies through the historical lens. So we'll take a closer look at the 4 activities in lesson 3. Lesson 3 begins with a review of historical lenses from the previous lesson. Students take out their historical lens note-taking tool, and the class shares what they've learned about the novel so far while analyzing it through this lens, using the questions on the screen to guide the discussion. How did historical events influence the author's creative choices? How did the text affect your view of the historical events or circumstances? To support students, the teacher might consider displaying their input in front of the class using a whiteboard or piece of butcher paper while students are sharing the details of the historical lens. We should definitely have a historical lens anchor chart posted in the classroom. Additionally, we should see the teacher checking on students individually for understanding and participation during the discussions and encouraging them to practice using literary terms, academic language, and the vocabulary they've been exposed to in this unit or prior units. The teacher might also consider turning this activity into a think, pair, share. If students need support with engaging in an academic discussion, modeling and use of the academic discussion reference guide is recommended. Next, students closely read and annotate an excerpt of Chapter 5 of the novel through the historical lens using a colored pen. By applying the historical lens to this section, students will better understand how the relationship between the Mirabelles and the regime is driving the narrative storyline. They can also grasp key aspects of the social and political climate that Julia Alvarez works to create in the story. To guide their reading and notes, they consider the questions on the screen. Responses are shared during a class discussion, and students respond to the questions on the question on the bottom of the screen. To support students, it is suggested that this section of text be printed out on a separate sheet of paper to give students room to make notes. If using a class set of novels, students can use Post-its for their annotations. If students need support with the questions, there are additional question prompts in the teaching notes that the teacher might distribute to help students focus their annotations. In activity 3, the class reviews the terms juxtaposition, metaphor, and simile. Then they reread chapter 5, mark each of the phrases on the screen, and answer the question, how does Alvarez's use of each of these literary devices impact your understanding of the chapter? Next, students reread a section of the text, find the word subversive in that section, and work with a partner to use context to define the word, then add it to their vocabulary journal. For this activity, it is important for students to bring their past work with literary devices into this text and begin reading and annotating on their own through the historical lens. They should be able to properly identify several literary devices in this section and use their knowledge of the novel's historical context to examine the impacts of the devices on the text. Students can complete the annotation in pairs or small groups. If they continue to struggle with the application of the literary criticism lens, they might complete the annotations in a whole group setting. If students need a refresher on literary devices, the teacher might direct them to the style reference guide. The teacher might also provide students with additional pre-selected devices in order to focus their analysis on applying the historical lens. Those can be found in the teaching notes. Additionally, the teacher might choose to augment this activity with a mentor sentence study by selecting a sentence from the text that is a strong example of a particular grammar or punctuation concept, or a sentence that utilizes a specific stylistic technique. For this lesson's final activity, students use their annotations to complete an entry that analyzes how juxtaposition works in the phrases beautiful, terrible past and terrible, beautiful present to create a paradox on the historical lens note taking tool. Entries are shared with a partner, and students add to or revise as needed before responses are shared with the class. To support students, the teacher might have a sample copy of the historical lens note taking tool displayed in front of the class as they model this process. If students need a refresher on Paradox, they can be directed to the style reference guide. They can also add more entries to the tool to be completed as a class, in small groups, or individually. So that concludes lesson 3 for our cub. We have students will know the meaning of juxtaposition. They'll understand Alvarez's use of juxtaposition to achieve a specific purpose in chapter 5 and be able to analyze how juxtaposition works in the phrases beautiful, terrible past and terrible, beautiful present to create a paradox using the historical lens note taking tool. So that is a wrap for this video. I welcome your feedback and look forward to hearing from you either on Twitter, via email, or in the comments. While you're here, don't forget to subscribe so you never have to worry about missing a video. Thanks for watching.